Welcome to the Dark Academicals, the podcast where we delve into the mythos of dark academia one book at a time. I'm Sarah Purnell.
And I'm Sophie Waters. This week we're looking at The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott Fitzgerald saw his third novel, The Great Gatsby, published in the spring of 1925. Gatsby, often coined as one of the great American novels, follows outsider Nick Carraway through a short slice of time during the Jazz Age in a bright electric suburb of New York State called West Egg. Through Nick's eyes, we uncover the mystery surrounding his manor-dwelling neighbour Jay Gatsby and his obsession with Nick's cousin Daisy in an intoxicating rush of parties, play acting and social posturing. If Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights is a brutal, remote kind of romance, then Fitzgerald's Gatsby is no less violent for all its silk and champagne. A harrowing study of human behaviour, it makes you wonder at the lengths men might go to when given the green light.
Some of you might be wondering why we've chosen The Great Gatsby as a Dark Academia title, because for all intents and purposes it is not Dark Academia. However, it's what we like to coin Dark Academia adjacent.
Yeah, so these are basically books that kind of sit alongside Dark Academia novels. They might share themes, aesthetics, parts of an aesthetic, atmosphere, events, situations, but it's not Dark Academia. And yet there are still those connecting threads and those parallels and also sharp contrasts that we think make really interesting comparisons between these novels.
Yeah, I think you'll definitely understand it better once we start holding it against our criteria of what does and doesn't make a Dark Academia novel. It does start to make more sense when you run through. And I think the fact that it does feature in The Secret History, which is our seminal text, I think makes it worthy of kind of digging into some of the influences that inform the writing and characters of The Secret History. Welcome to the Secret History fan club.
Because it's Richard's favourite novel, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he reads it during The Secret History. But on the surface, The Great Gatsby is a tragedy. It's a tragic novel. It's a Jazz Age novel. It's the great American novel. It's a literary text. I did lots of Googling and research to see how this novel is coined, because it's such a famous text that it is just The Great Gatsby, isn't it? It doesn't necessarily naturally fall into a genre.
I think it's definitely one of those books that's kind of like a foundation or a building block for a lot of other genres that came after it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another seminal text, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I know it's not one that's studied over here very often, but I think it's pretty much studied in every American high school, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's banned though, or it was banned in certain schooling institutions, I read when I was doing the old Google. And if Google says it, it must be true.
Obviously. Well, that's interesting. Not surprising, but interesting. Because, oh no, that's a spoiler for a tidbit I've got later. Not gonna say that one. So, I guess we should get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
And start comparing The Great Gatsby to our tenets of Dark Academia and see how it falls.
What makes The Great Gatsby a Dark Academia title?
Or a Dark Academia adjacent title.
True. The first on our list is a higher education setting, or often on campus, in elite or exclusive in some kind of way. And
it's definitely not that.
Yeah, quite clearly not. But I think there is a lot of emphasis on kind of these elitist kind of establishments. So there's a massive vein throughout the whole book of Gatsby being an Oxford man. And this is really important. Nick and Tom know each other from Yale. And it seems to be one of the key things to these men's successes is that they went to appropriately elite colleges as well.
Yeah, and also it's one of the things that right at the end of the novel, when Gatsby's dad is reading the letter, and all of these things that Gatsby wrote down as a teenager, a young man, all of the things that he needs to do to be successful, so many of them tie back to academia.
Yeah.
There's read an improving book every week. I think one of them was lots of little things like that kind of form that structure of academia and that elite academia kind of rising you above.
Yeah. And I think also, the Oxford mention is important because Oxford's almost like held aloft in such a way. It's almost above any other establishment. It's like, how could someone like Gatsby, who I think they can almost like smell that he's not actually who he says he is. Do you know what I mean? Like they can see that something's not as it seems with him, but they cannot figure it out. And I think as well, there's that sense like how could he possibly have gone to Oxford? It's like if he'd have chosen somewhere else, even if I don't know how old some of the American colleges are, but maybe even if he'd have chosen Harvard, like it wouldn't have had the same.
Or Princeton or one of the other Ivy Leagues.
Yeah.
But especially as well, choosing an English school.
Yeah.
In 1920, it's not a case of, I was going to say a quick flight, but I mean, it's still a 9-hour flight. But but you can't just hop across the Atlantic, can you? And study abroad as easily in the 1920s, especially when there's just been a war.
No, that's true.
It was a very different kind of situation there.
I think he could also hide in that, though, because it would be harder to trace.
Oh, yeah, true. Couldn't prove it or disprove it, really.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Gatsby hinges on that.
Yes.
That you can't prove his lying. You can't discredit him because he really gives a straight answer.
Yeah.
Especially when talking about how he makes his money.
Yes. I mean, even down to his name, like, it's not wrong. Like, he's not lying about his name. It's just not
his
quite name.
I'd actually forgotten that until I reread it. Jimmy Gats.
Yeah.
Because it's not too far off, but it's a very, very different name.
Yeah.
And it gives you a different image, doesn't it?
It does.
When it comes to old Gothic architecture, there's definitely not any of that.
No.
I mean, because it's the novel's set around New York City, Long Island, and I don't think we actually leave. Don't think we leave New York at all. No.
But the architecture is very grand.
It is very grand, yeah.
I'm thinking obviously Art Deco. It's all probably, a lot of it's going to be newer built, but it's in such a way that a lot of it probably does take reference point from Gothic and Italian, possibly. I'm not sure. I'm not up on my Art Deco.
No,
architecture.
It's basically, it's new and dripping in money.
Yes.
The main kind of old buildings in New York that are like faux Gothic, because it's not, modern New York isn't old enough to be Gothic. There's a massive church on Fifth Avenue, and it's like a stone's throw from the massive glass Apple store, and it looks really odd in the middle of Fifth Avenue. But
I think Gatsby's manor is interesting in itself, though. I think it has some of those Gothic elements in the way that it becomes a character in its own right, and how it's very much a living, breathing creature when it's full of people, all its lights are on, and then suddenly it's like a hollow shell. Yeah. It's very indicative of Gatsby's mentality, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the elements of the personality that Gatsby puts on is very old academia. Actually quite like English, kind of Victorian, Edwardian English, like old sport, his preoccupation with his car. That's a very kind of gentrified English thing, isn't it?
It is. And all his books are real. There's that fellow in his library just like pissed as a fart, taking books off the shelf and being surprised that there's actual pages in them.
I reckon Gatsby probably has read quite a lot of them, because it's not like he actually turns up to his own parties.
That's true.
He just hides. Another element of Dark Academia is a preoccupation with classical studies, whether that's Latin, Greek, English literature, philosophy, something like that. And we don't have that in a clear, linear presence in the novel, but I think thematically there are huge links to the ancient Greeks, because one of the main threads running through this, I think, is the idea of fate and destiny and doom, almost.
Yes.
Which is very Greek, and, you know, Gatsby essentially brings about his own downfall.
He does.
In a very Greek way. I can't think of what... Is that hubris? That's
hubris.
Not hubris. It is hubris.
Yeah. Hello, editing Sarah here. We definitely meant hamartia, not hubris. Whoopsie.
And I always confuse hubris and hamartia.
For this, I put that I think there's a preoccupation with wealth as like a study, because Nick is studying finance. Gatsby has been desperately grabbing at an income for years, and obviously has studied money in a way that allows him to get lots of it. And then there's Tom is described as restless, as though, you know, all of his possessions and wealth is just never enough. Like, this doesn't fulfill him in the way that he wants it to. I know it's not necessarily like a language or a philosophy, but it is definitely a way of living in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of works into the aspect of hero worship.
Yeah.
Because while there's not a tangible figure, it's that worship of that way of life. Worship of the social position that money gives you. That need to attain that level. And kind of the way you will easily fall out of that society if you kind of get that wrong.
I agree. Yeah, for hero worship, I mean, I suppose Gatsby's obsession with Daisy is probably the closest that we get to that element. Although I think to some extent Nick is also kind of hero worshipping Gatsby, especially towards the end.
Oh, definitely. But it kind of goes in a reverse, doesn't it, for a Dark Academia novel? It's not like obsession that kind of crumbles away as the reality kind of comes to light. It's the other way.
Yeah,
it's
it deepens.
As Gatsby... Remember, spoiler warnings in these podcast episodes. When Gatsby dies, that's the most complimentary and the most Nick cares about Gatsby throughout the novel, when it's kind of too late. I guess it's that putting him on a pedestal after death, that the rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of death, often in a Dark Academia novel you get some form of murder, and in Gatsby we get again, spoiler alerts if you haven't already guessed it, we are going to tell you everything that happens in this book. We get one accidental death, one murder, and one suicide. But I think interestingly we don't see the narrator as like a counterpart or someone who has a role in the deaths of those people. I think Nick, arguably like through his own poor judgment, sort of has a hand in it, but it's not like he has anything to gain or holds any particular grudge against these people enough to want them to meet their demise.
Yeah, he's a bystander to it, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's part of a witness. Isn't that a Greek element as well, actually? Or did I just conjure that up out of nowhere?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Hello, editing Sarah here again. I think actually what Sophie meant was the chorus. The chorus was a device often used in Greek tragedy, and they were a nondescript group of people, or could be a person, and they act like a go-between between the action and the players on stage and the audience. So they comment on what's happening without actually being actively involved themselves.
I've got to say, though, about the deaths, particularly the accidental death of Myrtle Wilson when she's hit by the car. I had forgotten this, but I was shocked by how, like, on page the description of her mutilated body was.
Yeah.
And it was also very, this is something we're going to touch on later, but very kind of female-directed violence in a way that we don't really see around anybody else.
Yeah.
Because they talk, I don't even know if I want to say it. They talk about her breasts, like, barely hanging on or barely being attached. And it just felt really sexually aggressive to me.
Yeah.
Like, really violent in a way that was not present on either of the other deaths.
Yeah, I think it's definitely gratuitous, and I don't see the benefit to having that on page.
No, there wasn't any, I don't think. It's a shock factor, I guess. Not needed.
Well, from that cheery topic to a dark, moody and or haunting vibe. It's not a book that you would ever think of as being dark and moody or haunting in a traditional sense. Like in the normal sense, when we read these kind of like brooding dark academia titles, you instantly know it right away. But I think the narrator in Nick, we get this kind of Saturnine temperament. Do you know what I mean? Like he's just he's not morose, but he's just, and not cynical, but it's almost that. I don't know how to explain it.
I know what you mean. I think there is a haunting vibe as well. Like, Gatsby clearly haunts Nick. And Daisy and what Gatsby has lost with Daisy, this life that he missed out on, haunts Gatsby. And from the very beginning, like, those opening words kind of set you up for doom, don't they? You know from that opening line that this isn't going to end happily. Another element that is prominent in Dark Academia titles is old money and how it collides with new money or no money. And that is definitely a huge one for Gatsby.
Yeah, this book is just all money.
Yeah. It's basically a kind of touch point of Jazz Age novels, isn't it?
Yeah.
That influx of new money and also the recovery after the First World War and the Depression, and because the Great Depression's late 20s, isn't it? 28? I want to say. The Wall Street crash was in 28, I think.
Yeah. Hello. Editing Sarah here again. Third time's the charm. I'd just like to point out that I had no clue which year the Wall Street crash was. And when Sophie said 1928, I said yes and hoped for the best.
August 29. I was close.
So Gatsby hits that sweet spot in between, like,
the war and the Depression.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the people that have made the money off of the war are sitting pretty, and the people that are lost did not.
Yeah. I mean, there's a quote where Nick and Gatsby are talking about Daisy, especially her voice. Nick seems to be quite preoccupied with her voice. I think he mentions quite often the sound of it.
Yeah.
And Gatsby says, "Her voice is full of money," he said suddenly. "That was it. I'd never understood before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the cymbal song of it. High in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl."
That's
there's
intense,
a lot,
isn't it?
There's a lot to unpack in that. I mean, it says a lot about the differences between Daisy, who is old money, and then Jay and Nick, who are, I mean, Nick's technically old money, but his family aren't as prominent as like Daisy's.
Yeah, and he doesn't
Tom's
have that much access to that money. His life is being paid for by his dad, but it's not like an account he has access to, is it? So.
No. I think you just notice the difference, don't you, between those being born and brought up with money, and it is just almost their whole personality. Yeah. Whereas those trying to grab at it or even pretend to be it.
So I guess it does shape you because it is part of becomes part of the society that you live in and your education. So it is reflected in how you speak and what you say and things like that. I
really enjoy that description of her voice, especially the jingle of it, because it just makes me think of like a pocket full of change. Like that's just what she sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds quite annoying to me, to be honest. But doesn't he also say later in the novel, I think it's when they're at the plaza, and it says something about like the harsh kind of almost graveliness of it when she's upset.
It's an odd book though, because not a whole lot happens.
No, it really doesn't.
It's
very short as well.
Yeah, and a lot of what you see on page is just quite mundane, really.
I guess it hinges on those relationships between the characters, doesn't it?
Yeah. We get to talk about my favourite topic, the weather. We get to talk about the weather. And there is weather in this book. I get really excited when there's weather.
The suffocating heat of a summer in New York. I mean, I've never experienced it. I don't really have a desire to. But the fact that people leave the city to get away from it speaks volumes to me. Like, I don't want any part of that, thank you.
Yeah, I think that day where everything goes to shit, I mean, it's already hot as heck. Their judgments are being coloured by that because, I mean, you know, when you're hot, like, you're irritable, you know, you end up becoming quite selfish, I think. Yeah.
It changes the way you think as well, doesn't it? Like, you can't function in the same way.
No.
Because your body's desperately trying to keep you alive.
Yeah. We also do get rain. It rains something awful on the day that Daisy comes over to Nick's to meet Gatsby. It's just hissing it down. Yeah, and you just get that sense, I think, that there is a storm coming. The storm's arrived, but like there's a storm coming. You know, this is like a turning point of the novel, isn't it?
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that kind of like the break then happens under suffocating heat rather than a physical storm. That's a very different choice to normal, like the standard Dark Academia use of weather. It's very different, but it has an equally strong impact, I think.
Yeah.
Because it feels claustrophobic sometimes, especially in that hotel room in the plaza.
Yeah.
It feels cloying and kind of charged.
Yeah, and I think the weather is mostly, I mean, it's not even remarked upon other than on those days of contention, which I think is interesting too.
Yeah, it's used very cleverly.
Yeah.
The final tenet of Dark Academia novels that we want to look at is underdeveloped social skills, or the protagonist being portrayed as an outsider.
Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner.
Yeah. We have two big outsiders, Gatsby and Nick. So, as I've mentioned before, Gatsby literally hides at his own parties. Like, he doesn't necessarily invite people. They just turn up. He's like, no thanks. And he goes to hide. But he still takes delight in the fact, in his parties. It's a very obvious social awkwardness there.
Yeah. I mean, he's just throwing these parties on the hope that Daisy will visit one day.
Yeah, that's it.
That's why there's an open invitation for everyone.
Yeah, that is true. I think he probably gets a kick out of it as well. Like, he's got the money to do this. And he goes all out every time. Like, it's a show-off moment as well, isn't it?
It is. I think part of the reason, though, for him to hide away is it gives less opportunity for that bubble to burst. Like, they can come up with all the kind of rumours they want about him, but they'll never learn the actual truth if the man himself is never there.
Yeah, true. And I guess that builds the legend around him, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
But a complete opposite to Nick, really.
Yeah, poor Nick, squashed in a small cottage between the grander mansions along the shore. Like, he's just an oversight. But that makes him the perfect person to be the fly on the wall type character. Like, he's so unoffensive that he just kind of gets... I meant like in his social standing. Do you know what I mean? Like his
position in the novel.
Yeah, is so unoffensive that he can just get carried along by these bigger characters and just kind of observe everything that's happening. No, the character himself is rather offensive.
And he is shockingly like Richard from The Secret History. Which is interesting because I'm pretty sure in The Secret History, Richard actually compares himself. I did save it. Oh, I knew I'd need this. So, the Great Gatsby is Richard Papen's favourite book, and he rereads it early on in The Secret History. And he says in the book that he finds certain tragic similarities between Gatsby and myself.
He compares himself to Gatsby, like of all characters. He's a Nick all over. He is not a Gatsby.
Yeah, which I think is really irritating.
That is irritating. It is irritating.
It is irritating. Because he's putting himself as the tragic hero, the star of the show, when he is an observer. He's a vehicle for the story.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
I mean, it makes his obsession with Camilla make a lot more sense if he sees himself as a Gatsby character.
Oh, that's true, yeah. Because I could see Camilla as Daisy, actually. That's
Yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, because there's this great quote about, like, how Nick sees himself. Because Nick is very aware that he is the Richard. You know, he knows that he is watching this all unfold. And he says... I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realised by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. So this isn't a position he wants. He's very aware of it, but he doesn't want that. He wants to be Gatsby, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Very obviously. But then Richard wants to be Henry in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, but Gatsby would never want to be Nick.
That's true.
Oh, I love a tangle. An intertextuality tangle.
An entanglement.
I think what's really interesting as well, that F. Scott Fitzgerald was also an outsider. I read this really interesting article with... It's actually like a transcript of a radio interview with an author who wrote about Gatsby. Her name's Maureen Corrigan. And she wrote a lot about F. Scott Fitzgerald and like his biography and things, as well as the novel itself. And I'd never really thought about it this way, but she highlights him as an outsider too. Because he never achieved the literary stardom that he was expected to. He slid into alcoholism. His wife was institutionalised for most of her life, Zelda Fitzgerald. He was even denied a Catholic burial because his novels were deemed too risque.
Wow.
It actually took Fitzgerald's daughter, Scotty, actually had them reburied together. And apparently on their slab, it has the final lines from Gatsby.
Oh.
Which is quite sad and depressing, because they're not hopeful lines.
They're not, but... Wow.
It's a very cool tidbit, I think.
It's very much well, look at me now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Because obviously he died in 1940?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so he never saw his career take off. I think Zelda saw it because she died in 48, I believe. So I think he was starting to get recognition as she died. They were both super, super young, doomed characters in their own right, really. I think we're pretty united in the two big criticisms of The Great Gatsby, aren't we?
We are.
The representation of women and the racism.
Aye.
Right. So even if there is other stuff, these were too big and glaring to kind of look around, really.
Yeah.
Because there is not a single likable or empathetic character in the novel, and yet the women are still treated even more harshly than the men.
Yeah, they don't get a good treatment. They're not portrayed in a great way at all.
No.
I mean, you can chalk it up to some of it being because it's a book of its time, but there are also plenty of books written at that time and also before then that still manage to be respectful about the women that it portrays.
Exactly.
While also being truthful to the limitations too, but
Yeah.
But usually those empathetic books are written by women, so...
This is very true, yeah. And he didn't have... I actually haven't read any of his other novels, but I just have this impression that he didn't have a great rep with treatment of women. I don't know whether that's because he was part of, like, the gang of, like, Ernest Hemingway, who was notoriously horrific towards women. But that transcript I just mentioned, Maureen Corrigan actually says, in fact, that's one of the reasons why Fitzgerald thought it didn't sell well in 1925, because there are no likeable female characters and women drive the fiction market.
That's very astute.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, he might be onto something there.
Yeah. He does have a very blinkered perspective. And I think it's not just that it upholds those patriarchal elements of society in the 1920s. It kind of reinforces and double downs on it. And I think that's where the problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you were saying that it's kind of a weird time for women.
Yeah. It is an odd time because they're starting to see more freedoms. Like they have more opportunity to do more things independently from like their household or from their husband, and yet they're still required to be those kind of like maternal figures and be very wifey. Yeah. But also you can sort of dabble in this, but I don't know. It's just a very strange time to be a woman, I think.
Yeah, because you could be a socialite.
Yeah.
You could go to the parties and everything, but you had to be beautiful. You had to be charming. You had to have the good conversation skills. And the idea of that was still to snare a husband, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Could they vote? Yeah.
The women in Gatsby they're utterly ridiculous in the way he describes them. I mean, Jordan Baker, the way she's described as sitting, like she's balancing something. And, you know, like, it's almost like the women are constantly in like a kind of tableau for men to look upon, to maybe remark upon, but they're not important enough to be actually part of the main action.
Yeah. She's always like laying or like draped across a sofa, isn't she?
Yes.
Like she doesn't ever have a conversation standing up or sitting up. She's always laying across a sofa.
Yeah.
She's a strange character.
She is, because Jordan Baker, we see her as this very odd, like you said, sitting, lying, draped over something, but also she's one of those women that have the peculiar freedom in the sense that she's like a golf champion.
Yeah.
And she is applauded for that and celebrated for that, but she's still somehow a second-class citizen.
Mm. Yeah. And the way she gets brushed off by Nick. Brutal. I'm so glad she pulls him up on it at the end of the novel.
Yeah.
But I hate the way that he gets the final word.
I know. Yeah, he very
really annoys him.
He gets called out on his bullshit, but
there's no consequence to it.
No.
He just carries on.
Yeah. It's the way he talks about a girl that he's supposedly promised to or engaged with back home. And he's like, oh, I probably should write to her at some point and call it off.
And that's literally all we hear about that.
Yeah.
It's just a passing comment.
Should probably do something about that. Yeah. I might next week.
But again, I wonder if that's part of the thing. Like, it's not his story. He's telling Gatsby and Daisy and Tom's and the Wilsons' story. He is watching it. Like his life is almost it's a sideline, isn't it, to the actual goings on in the novel. He's just there. So the other big thing is the racism in the novel. And this largely comes from Tom.
Yeah, Tom is awful.
Yeah, he is shocking. But even though the rest of the characters aren't outwardly or verbally racist, they let it slide. They don't pick him up on it. They don't. No. Even internally, Nick never goes, oh, not cool, man.
Yeah, exactly.
It's let go because he is this big scary man.
Yeah. I mean, he's essentially spewing, he's just like raving on and on about white supremacy, and no one in that room goes, I don't know about that. They just, they almost like brush it off as like, oh, he's being very eccentric. But it's not questioned as maybe you shouldn't have that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I do wonder if it's a heavy-handed way of Fitzgerald kind of isolating Tom as a villain. Because Gatsby sees Tom as what's standing in between his happiness with Daisy.
Yeah.
And obviously Nick hates him as well. Because he's hateful.
Yes.
So, but it is a very obvious kind of setting up of Tom as the villain, I think.
Yeah.
In a really unpleasant and gross way.
Yeah.
I think it would have actually been more effective if the other characters had called him out. That would have planted him even further.
Yeah, because he would have just gone even harder with it, I think.
Yeah. Gross man.
I just can't shake the image of him in these like riding breeches and like riding boots and a silk shirt. I don't know. It's just, I see him just stood on his little veranda bit and it's just gross. Just like a muscled sausage stuffed into into his clothes. I can't. That's all I see.
Thank you for that image.
And actually, I remember when I read it the first time, I was convinced that it was going to be him that got offed at the end. I was utterly convinced, and it's not.
I think that would have made sense in a Dark Academia sense as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Obviously, Gatsby dying follows the pattern. Obviously, like, he's the Henry.
Yeah.
But, yeah, for a very short book where not much happens, a lot of people do die.
They do.
Shall we talk about Nick?
No, I want to talk about the car first.
Oh, okay. Please go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about like isolated elements or like little symbols or something in the book that I wanted to talk about. And the obvious one is obviously the green light. But everyone talks about the green light. So I was like, let's not talk about the green light. I want to talk about the car. I think the car is a very powerful and symbolic element. Gatsby's automobile is stupid. Let's face it, the thing is stupid. It's big and flashy, obscene. It's a token of like status and control.
Yeah.
And then, but what you get is when Tom insists on driving it, it's clear where the power is shifting, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's almost like Tom putting Gatsby in his place. Like, no, I will drive this car because I'm the person, this is my rightful place.
Yeah. It's a very stereotypically masculine kind of pissing contest, isn't it?
It is. But there are also consequences for that kind of posturing and extravagance. So this kind of like reaching that all of the men have in this book ends in tragedy for anyone who's been at the wheel of that car. Essentially. So Tom loses his mistress Myrtle and Mr. Wilson loses his wife. Daisy loses Gatsby. Gatsby loses both Daisy and his life. And then there's also the ongoing deal between Tom and Mr. Wilson to sell his coupe. So it's almost like he wants to offer an exchange of goods Like, I'm going to... Do you know...
From the look on your face and what you're doing with your hands, yeah.
And I also thought it was interesting that both Jordan Baker and Daisy are both terrible drivers. It's... I mean, of course they are, because that's the stereotype that's been around for as long as automobiles have been around, that cars offer women the kind of freedom that they've never had before.
Yeah.
And that's scary for men. So, of course, they're bad at driving, because women shouldn't be in charge of their own destiny. It's dangerous. Exactly. Someone will get hurt.
It couldn't be less obvious, could it, in what he's doing with that? Like,
no.
Dude. I think it would be interesting, actually, because this is Fitzgerald's third novel, and he has 6. I think it would be interesting to see if his attitude towards women changes as his relationship with Zelda changes.
Yeah, that would be interesting, actually.
As he was writing Gatsby, I think this is when Zelda first went to sanatorium, or at least hospital.
Yeah.
In some way. So I do wonder how much of that is influenced. And there's also a lot of rumours about Zelda's involvement with the writing of the books.
That's interesting.
There are lots of bylines and kind of tidbits, and there's even, I can't remember where I read it. I don't know how true this is, but there's one of Fitzgerald's novels where Zelda is reported to say, "That was lifted straight from one of my diaries."
Rude.
In the classic case of a husband taking all of the credit for the woman's work. Which is interesting. So I think that would be potentially enlightening.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Now that we've talked about my vroom vrooms for a little bit, we can now talk about Nick Carraway, if you wish.
Cool. So I think we've both said, Nick has that same simmering internal kind of gut reaction of being violent or creepy towards women that Richard does in The Secret History.
Yeah.
And this is definitely not something I picked up on when I last read it, which was probably, 10 years ago. I think I read it at university.
Yeah, I think the biggest red flag is when he imagines himself following women home through the city.
Mm-hmm. And to their apartments.
Yeah, right to their apartments, where they'll turn and wave or smile. No, that's just strange.
Yeah. And then with the way that he describes Myrtle Wilson upon her death. And even just the physical way he describes the characters.
Yeah.
It's very salacious almost. And it's absolutely creepy. Because he focuses so much on their shape and just leery stuff that no. It's that kind of sexual objectifying that seems to be a concurrent thread through all of Dark Academia novels. Except maybe Madam.
What I put about the first thing I wrote about Nick Carraway is he's 30 and still a bit of a drifter. I know obviously there's been the war in the middle of their 20s, but there's just a sense of restless apathy for him. I've always feel like he doesn't seem to experience a varied range of emotions. He's quite not flat, but he doesn't seem to swing wildly into anger or passion, or it all seems to be very almost monotone for him.
He almost takes on the feelings from other characters and inserts himself into that situation rather than having his own opinion on it.
Yeah.
And then even when he does, I think there's quite early on when he gets angry at Gatsby, doesn't he? Because Gatsby wants him to meet him for lunch with someone but won't tell him why. He gets angry, but he doesn't actually do anything about that anger. He just throws a mild strop and goes along with it anyway.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any agency, basically, I think.
That's true.
And I think that probably fits into his role as the observer, doesn't it?
Yeah. He's not a particularly reliable narrator.
Oh,
That's
no.
for sure.
Definitely not. And I think that becomes really obvious by the end.
Yeah.
With his kind of, after Gatsby's death, when he's suddenly like horrified that no one would come to Gatsby's funeral. When at the beginning of the novel, I don't think Nick would have gone to his funeral.
No.
You know? And he doesn't like him any more than he does at the end of the novel. He's just taken on this role of the person who is looking after, like, Gatsby's funeral and estate and everything, and contacting people. He's taken on that role, so he's adopted the feelings that he thinks he should have.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a word for that. I feel like there's a literary term, but I can't think of what it is. So, we'll move on to Daisy.
Yes. Daisy, Daisy, Daisy.
Daisy Buchanan.
Yeah, I think the first thing I wrote was that she does remind me of Camilla from The Secret History, in the sense that she can't seem to do any wrong in the eyes of the men around her. Like, she still does things, but...
So many.
She plays the game and plays it well, and I don't think we can blame her for that.
Absolutely, and I think that as well ties into kind of her famous quote. Of course, I only saved 2 words of it, as if I could remember it. Jeez. Daisy speaks early on in the novel about her daughter, and she says, "I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool." One of the most famous quotes in literature. And I guess it never really occurred to me before, but this isn't Daisy being stupid or airy. I think it's actually quite sad, because she wants her daughter to be protected against the horrors of being a woman and being a woman in this trapped period of time that we've already spoken about. Being beautiful and clever and innocent is her best defense and her best chance at security and kind of catching the man that will provide the life for her.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually really sad rather than a bit kind of airy-fairy.
Yeah. I mean, I always find that she's a bit of a Kathy from Wuthering Heights kind of character. Like, she's not particularly likeable, but she makes the choices she needs to make to survive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that time, in that situation, those choices are so limited.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to be good choices. Like,
no,
that you're
exactly.
left with.
You can't just hang on in hopes that charming lieutenant comes back to marry you. Like,
yeah, it's her Charlotte Lucas moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Poor Charlotte Lucas.
27.
I'm a burden to my family. Poor Charlotte. But it is that idea, isn't it? It's...
Yeah, I mean, it's Kathy marrying Ujima Flip down the road because he's got... I can't think what his name is now.
I
He's got
remember.
I don't know. But he's got a house and
time.
money and then Heathcliff turns back up and goes, "Yeah, I've got money." And she's like, "That's nice. I'm married now." Yeah, exactly.
A little too late.
Yeah.
I think, interestingly, apparently that beautiful fool thing is inspired by Zelda's reaction to her daughter's birth, because Zelda was, a rich socialite, very much in Daisy's social situation and social position.
I just think I don't have much written down for Jay Gatsby, apart from he is an interesting character study, just from the sense of how he has created himself and upheld that, like, the whole myth of Jay Gatsby. And I think as well, we're never really sure of his true intentions or, like, his true motivations, really. I know he is obsessed with Daisy, but what does he really want from her?
Yeah. And what would he do if he got her? Like,
exactly.
That's been his life's purpose.
Yeah, he says of Daisy when they were courting back before she was married, obviously. And he says, it excited him too that many men had already loved Daisy. It increased her value in his eyes.
That's gross.
Yeah, just because she was a desired object by many men, he was like, that's the one for me.
That's very Madam, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ew.
He describes her as, she was the first nice girl he had ever known. I mean, what does that even mean? Nice girl. Rich?
Yeah, or
Like,
one that paid attention to him? Like, it's such a wishy-washy word, isn't it? Oh,
nice.
That was some good alliteration there. Yeah, we don't really have any, like, genuine foundation for why he loves Daisy so much.
No.
He just does, and that's fact.
The thing about Gatsby, though, is he gets me every time. Like, I am charmed by him every time.
Yep. Same.
I sympathise. I feel sad. I'm heartbroken that he dies at the end. But also, when you think about what might have happened, you can't know. And this is why when I was writing the intro, it makes you wonder at the lengths men might go when given the green light. Like, how far was he willing to go to get Daisy?
Because, I mean, he wasn't subtle about it, was he?
No.
He was willing to take his shot, regardless of the consequences.
Yeah.
Even if, like, that snowballed into the consequence being his life. He's a very complicated character.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge revelation as well when you find out that J. Gatsby isn't actually his name. Kind of immediately kind of undoes everything you've built up about Gatsby in your head, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we don't see that reflected in Nick at all. Nick doesn't seem to react.
No. I mean, like I said, I think everything that he said, though, there is like a thread of truth in it. Like, he doesn't full on lie. He just embellishes it in a way that makes it sound better. So it is still like Jay Gatsby isn't that far from Jimmy Gats. It's just more flowery. It's more acceptable to like high society. He did go to Oxford for a little bit, so he wasn't lying.
Yeah, he just didn't actually study at Oxford.
No. And he did make his money in the pharmaceutical companies.
It's lying by mission, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on The Great Gatsby?
I think I still really, really like it as a novel. Because I've only read it, this is only the second time I've read it. I first read it when I was at university, so rather disgustingly, about 10 years ago. And I remembered absolutely adoring it. And I still really enjoyed it. I think, having studied a lot since then and being much more aware of my own leanings on like feminism and stuff, that jumped out at me in a way that made me like it a little bit less, maybe. But it's such an interesting novel to look at. There's so much there. It's so rich. Even though it's 180 pages, 190 pages.
Yeah.
And nothing much really happens. There's so much there. And it is beautifully written.
It is.
So it is still a thumbs up from me.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed comparing it to the Dark Academia tenets because it's not an obvious choice. It's not something you'd go, oh yeah, I can see the connections between that and The Secret History. If you said that to just someone who's just read The Secret History and be there, what? Because everyone knows the Gatsby story, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, it's only my second time reading it. Again, I read it at university, which was a disgusting amount of time ago now. And I used it heavily in my final dissertation, but my reading of it this time is completely different than it was the first time. And I gave it 5 stars then, and I probably still would give it 5 stars, but for different reasons.
Okay. So I looked back, I gave it 4 stars back in 2011, and I would give it 4 stars now again. But again, differently.
Yeah.
It is a great novel. Whether it's the great American novel, who knows? That's a big question for another day. Right. would you like to announce to the people what we've got coming up next time? So next time we will be looking at Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Ayamidi.
Welcome to Niveus Private Academy, where money paves the hallways and the students are never less than perfect. Until now. Because anonymous texter Aces is bringing 2 students' dark secrets to light. Talented musician Devon buries himself in rehearsals, but he can't escape the spotlight when his private photos go public. Head girl Chiamaka isn't afraid to get what she wants, but soon everyone will know the price she has paid for power. Someone is out to get them both, someone who holds all the aces, and they're planning much more than a high school game.
So excited for that. I think it's going to be really good fun.
Yeah.
So this is a dark academia YA thriller.
Yes.
Set in a boarding school. So
yes.
Ticking some boxes already. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed talking about The Great Gatsby with us, and we hope you'll join us next time. Bye.
Bye.